You know that feeling, right? That gut punch moment when someone you love, someone you raised, shows you a side of themselves so utterly cold, so utterly selfish that it feels like a physical assault? Yeah, that's where my story begins. Because for me, that moment wasn't a slow burn. It was a sudden, ice-cold plunge into betrayal, all over $80,000. My name is Isabella. I'm a recently retired accountant, which means I spent my entire working life thinking in terms of ledgers, interest rates, and most importantly, clear, documented agreements. My son Alex, he's my only child. And for the longest time, he was the center of my universe. But when he finally came to me for that huge sum, it wasn't for some frivolous purchase. It was for his big break. A massive expansion into a lucrative local market for his boutique tech repair business. He pitched it like he was going to be the next Steve Jobs, only with better people skills, or so he claimed. It was $80,000. Not chump change. It was a significant chunk of my retirement savings, the money I had set aside for a nice, comfortable life after working my tail off for 35 years. When I handed over the bank transfer slips, I looked him straight in the eye and I said, "Alex, this is a loan. No interest, no insane deadline, but a loan. We need to sign a simple agreement just stating the terms." He looked at me, gave me that patented dazzling smile and signed the paper without even reading it, just eager to get out the door and start spending. The agreement was simple. Repayment within 2 years, starting 6 months after the transfer. Easy peasy. Fast forward 18 months. Alex's business is booming. He's driving a brand new luxury SUV. He's talking about buying property. Meanwhile, I'm getting closer to my 2-year deadline and I haven't seen a single dime. No check, no apology, not even a mention of the loan. So I did what any mother would do. I gently brought it up over Sunday brunch, right after he finished complaining about how expensive designer coffee was. "Alex," I started, trying to keep my tone light and conversational, "I'm so proud of how well the business is doing. Seriously, you've smashed it. Which brings me to the loan. The 2-year mark is coming up in 6 months. Have you worked out a repayment schedule?" He stopped stirring his cappuccino. His smile didn't drop, but his eyes, they went cold. The kind of cold that feels like a stranger is sitting across the table. "Repayment? What are you talking about, Mom?" Thought he was joking. I actually snorted a laugh. "The $80,000, honey. The business loan. The one we signed the agreement for." And this is where the betrayal started. He leaned back in his chair, a look of smug superiority replacing the warmth I was used to. He crossed his arms and he said with the kind of condescending tone usually reserved for badly performing interns, "Oh, that. Mom, seriously? That wasn't a loan. That was a gift." I blinked. I must have looked like a stunned fish. "A gift? Alex, we signed a document. It clearly states personal loan agreement and outlines the repayment terms." He shrugged, completely dismissive. "Paperwork. You're an accountant, Mom, you know how lawyers can twist anything. Besides, you're my mother. 80 grand is nothing to you. It's a gift from a wealthy parent to their hardworking son. You just said you were proud of me, didn't you? This was your way of showing it." I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't the son I raised. This was a calculating stranger who had used my love and trust as a personal ATM. He wasn't grateful, he was entitled. I tried to argue, to appeal to his conscience, reminding him of the sacrifices I made, the nest egg I had dipped into. "Mom, look around," he gestured dramatically with a perfectly manicured hand, encompassing the expensive restaurant and his brand new outfit. "I'm doing well. I deserve this. You had your turn. Now it's mine. Stop being so petty about old money." I left the restaurant in a haze of anger and shock. That whole week I replayed his words. That wasn't a loan. That was a gift. The way he looked at me, the utter disrespect. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about principle. It was about being manipulated and then mocked by my own child. I decided right then that I was done playing the sad, forgiving mother. I was going to switch back to Isabella the accountant, the woman who knew how to handle difficult audits and uncooperative clients. I was going to treat him like the uncooperative debtor he was. I had the signed paper, but I knew just from his arrogant tone that he would try to deny the conversation ever happened, or claim I coerced him into signing the initial agreement. I needed solid proof of his current attitude, of his blatant denial of the loan. The next time I asked him to meet, I wasn't setting up a lunch. I was setting up a trap. Before I walked into his fancy new office, I activated the voice recording app on my phone and slipped it into the inside pocket of my jacket. I even wore a jacket, which was unusual for the sunny afternoon, just to make sure the microphone was concealed perfectly. He greeted me with the same infuriating, patronizing smile. To what do I owe the pleasure, Mom? Need a small handout yourself? I ignored the insult. I went straight to the point, calm and measured, letting the recording device capture every word. Alex, I need to know definitively. Are you refusing to acknowledge the loan we signed for $80,000? He laughed, a loud booming sound that made his assistant look up nervously. Refusing? No, Mom. I'm clarifying. It was a gift. You gave it to me out of love. End of discussion. I owe you nothing. In fact, he leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly but still clear for the recording. If you push this, I'll just tell everyone you're mentally unstable and trying to ruin my thriving business out of jealousy. I'll make sure you regret even bringing it up. That threat, the threat to paint me as mentally unstable and ruin my reputation, was the final straw. It solidified everything. It turned this from a simple financial dispute into a cold, calculated act of revenge. I walked out of that office, the recording burning a hole in my pocket, feeling no sadness, only a laser-focused determination. You wanted to play dirty? Fine. I had the evidence and I had the resolve. And hey, while you're listening to this wild ride, drop a comment below and tell me what part of the world you're tuning in from. I'd love to know where my story is reaching you. I immediately contacted the best civil litigation lawyer I could find. When I played the recording for her in her office, her reaction was priceless. Her eyebrows shot up and she leaned back, a fierce grin spreading across her face. Mrs. Reed, she said, using my married name, your son just handed us the case. He didn't just deny the debt, he threatened you. We are going to bury him in paperwork. He used you like a bank and now we're going to show him the true meaning of collateral. That's when I knew he was going to regret ever uttering the word gift. As I mentioned, my name is Isabella and I spent my entire career dealing in facts, figures, and trust, the kind of trust that allows economies to function. Alex was raised in that environment. He knew the value of a dollar, or at least he used to. To truly understand the depth of his betrayal, you need the backstory, the setup that allowed him to believe he could pull off this stunning act of entitlement. Alex wasn't some spoiled trust fund kid. When he was growing up, we weren't rolling in money, but we were comfortable. I was meticulous with our finances, ensuring he had everything he needed for a good education and a stable home life, even after his father and I separated when Alex was in middle school. I sacrificed a lot to make sure he never felt the pinch of being a single-parent household. This wasn't just a mother's love. It was an investment in his future. Throughout his 20s, he was what I affectionately called an idea guy. He had passion, he had energy, but he lacked the capital and the consistency to turn those fleeting sparks into real fire. I helped him out constantly, but always in small, manageable amounts that were clearly understood as loans or advances against future work. Remember that time he wanted to launch a website selling artisanal dog treats? I floated him $5,000 for the initial ingredients and website design. He paid it back every cent 6 months later. Or the time he tried to design a social media app for local artists. That was a $12,000 investment in server space and marketing. Again, he repaid it once the venture folded, selling the remaining assets to cover the debt. The point is, there was a precedent. He knew how this worked. He knew the difference between a loan and a gift. This history is why the $80,000 incident was such a seismic shock. This wasn't a small seed investment. This was a massive chunk of my security, given under the pretense of a formal written agreement. When he first came to me 18 months before the confrontation, he was charming, earnest, and completely convincing. He had finally found his niche, high-end custom tech repair and modification, focusing on rare and vintage gadgets. He needed a central, well-located office space, and the initial inventory of specialized tools and rare parts. "Mom," he'd pleaded, sitting at my kitchen table, a spreadsheet pulled up on his tablet. "This is it. This is the one that sticks. I've done the projections. I'll be profitable within a year and I can start repayment by month 7. I just need the 80. A bank would bury me in interest. I trust you, Mom. You're the only one who understands the numbers." He buttered me up expertly, appealed to my professional skills, and most importantly, he appealed to my maternal pride. I saw a dedicated, mature young man finally ready to take on the world. I didn't hesitate. I drew up the simple loan agreement myself, A one-page document clearly stating the principal amount, the 2-year repayment term, and a clause specifying that failure to repay would result in legal recourse. Just standard boilerplate stuff. He signed it quickly, not even blinking. He was just so eager to get his hands on the money. For the first year things seemed great. Alex was working non-stop. He'd send me updates, pictures of his shop, and occasionally he'd take me out for a decent meal. Paid for by him, I might add. He'd talk about the business, about his plans, always making sure to mention how the initial capital had secured the perfect location. He never mentioned the debt, but I assumed he was waiting until the business stabilized completely. The change was gradual, subtle, and then suddenly a hammer blow. About 6 months before I brought up the subject, Alex started to change his lifestyle and, more alarmingly, his attitude. He bought that ridiculous SUV, a massive shiny black thing that screamed, "I'm successful and I don't care who knows it." He started dressing differently, shedding the practical engineer look for expensive, high-fashion brands. He also started dating this woman, Tiffany, who seemed to have an appetite for designer shopping and 5-star resorts that matched his burgeoning ego. Whenever I'd see him, the conversation was less about his struggles and more about his triumphs. He'd brag about his profits, about his expensive trips, about the poor taste of people who drove anything less than a luxury car. It was all a bit much, but I put it down to the excitement of sudden success. I thought, okay, he's just enjoying his youth and his money. He'll settle down. But then came the conversation at brunch, the one where he called my money a gift. That's when the subtle entitlement transformed into a monstrous arrogance. It wasn't just the words. It was the look in his eyes, the absolute conviction that he deserved this money more than I did, and that I was pathetic for even asking for my own retirement savings back. He truly believed that because I was his mother, my financial security was secondary to his meteoric rise. My decades of hard work, my responsible savings habits, all of it was just a resource for him to tap, drain, and then discard. He even had the audacity to suggest that my asking for the money back was a sign of my own failure to manage my finances. "Mom, you're an accountant. You should have multiple streams of income. Relying on this old money shows a lack of creativity," he sneered right there in the middle of the crowded cafe. Hearing those words, after everything I had done, the sleepless nights I worked to keep him in a good school, the sacrifices I made after the divorce, it felt like a slap. It was the moment the emotional connection shattered and I saw him not as my son, but as a manipulative, ungrateful predator. And this is what motivated my shift from Isabella the mom to Isabella the litigator. I didn't just want the money back. I wanted him to understand the weight of his actions. I wanted him to feel the consequences of treating his own mother like an ATM and then mocking her when the balance was due. When my lawyer, a sharp woman named Ms. Davies, started preparing the case, she focused heavily on this history. The clear precedent of previous loans being repaid, the written agreement, and most damningly, the audio recording. She said, "Alex built his entire defense on the idea that you are a doting, forgetful mother who simply chose to give him a massive gift. We're going to show the court that you are a meticulous professional who was manipulated and then actively threatened." The stage was set for the biggest fight of my life. The immediate aftermath of the recording was a period of intense, controlled action on my part, contrasted sharply with Alex's escalating arrogance. The conflict was no longer merely financial. It had become deeply psychological and emotionally draining. I had introduced the main problem, his refusal to repay the $80,000. But now the secondary challenges and moral dilemmas were piling up. My lawyer, Ms. Davies, advised me to maintain complete silence with Alex. No calls, no texts, no emails. This was incredibly hard. Every maternal instinct told me to try and talk sense into him one last time, to shake him and ask, "Where is the son I raised?" But I knew that any contact could potentially muddy the legal waters or give him ammunition to twist the narrative. The silence was agonizing but necessary. Alex, however, mistook my silence for defeat. He thought his threat, to paint me as mentally unstable, had worked. He became bolder, his arrogance reaching spectacular new heights. He even started telling members of our extended family his version of the story. "Poor Mom," he'd sigh dramatically to my sister Aunt Carol, during a family gathering that I strategically avoided. "She's getting older and she's confused. She keeps thinking that little seed money I gave her back years ago was a massive loan. It's just a misunderstanding, but she's so stubborn. I'm trying to be patient with her, but her jealousy of my success is worrying." Aunt Carol, bless her heart, immediately called me spitting mad. Isabella, what is he talking about? Seed money? Jealousy? He's turning the whole family against you. He's saying you're trying to destroy his business out of spite. This added a new layer to the conflict. Character assassination. He wasn't just stealing. He was trying to ruin my reputation among the very few people I still held close. It presented a moral dilemma. Should I break my silence and defend myself to the family, risking my legal advantage? Miss Davies was firm. No, Isabella. Let him talk. The more wildly he lies and overreaches, the better he looks when we drop the bomb in court. Let him dig his own grave. So I stayed silent, enduring the pitying or suspicious glances from a few family members who had bought his story. This was excruciating. The emotional stakes were incredibly high. I felt like I was battling my own flesh and blood, not just for the money but for my sanity and my integrity. Meanwhile, Miss Davies was meticulously building the case. We filed the formal lawsuit, citing the breach of contract and, crucially, adding a claim for emotional distress based on the explicit threat Alex made in the recorded conversation. This was a strategic move, designed to show the court that this wasn't just about a commercial dispute, but an abusive dynamic. When Alex finally received the court summons, his reaction wasn't fear, but absolute rage, followed by renewed, condescending scorn. He didn't even hire a decent lawyer. He hired a cheap general practice attorney who, frankly, seemed out of his depth and probably took Alex's story at face value. Rich mom suddenly turns crazy and tries to ruin son's life. Alex even called me one night, ignoring the clear instruction from his own lawyer, which I found out later. He was absolutely furious. The phone call, which I thankfully recorded again, was a torrent of abuse. You really did it, you pathetic old woman, he screamed into the phone. You think you can bully me? I'm going to countersue for defamation. I'm going to bankrupt you, Isabella. You will regret the day you put my name on that stupid piece of paper. You'll lose your house over this. I kept my voice low and steady, a skill I learned from years of dealing with aggressive clients. Alex, this is a legal matter now. You should talk to your lawyer. I have all the documentation and I have evidence of this conversation. Evidence? What evidence? It's just your word against mine. And guess what, Mom? I have a successful business. You're just a cranky old lady living off savings. Who do you think the judge will believe? He was so confident, so dismissive of the law and reality. He truly believed his success somehow made him immune to consequences. This was the rising tension leading up to the mediation. The court mandated a mediation session before a full trial, hoping to resolve the dispute privately. This was the moment of truth, and Miss Davies assured me we were walking in with a loaded gun. During the preparation for mediation, she emphasized the importance of the audio. Alex is relying entirely on bluster and the assumption that you have no proof, he called it a gift, and no proof of the threat. We will let him ramble, deny, and posture, and then we will hit him with the tape. It needs to be the turning point, the absolute surprise. So I entered the mediation room with a nervous knot in my stomach, but a deep reservoir of resolve. Alex walked in looking like a king surveying his kingdom. Designer suit, expensive watch, and that same infuriating smug smirk. He avoided eye contact with me, only conferring with his clearly stressed-out lawyer. The mediator, a kind, older woman, began the proceedings calmly. Alex's lawyer started with a long, rambling account of how I was misremembering the situation, how the $80,000 was clearly a parental grant, and how my lawsuit was causing irreparable harm to Alex's reputation. Alex chimed in, unable to help himself. He was performing for the mediator. Look, Mom, just drop this, he said, shaking his head sadly as if I were the unreasonable child. I love you, but this is ridiculous. You know I don't owe you anything. You gave it to me. Just accept it and move on. His entire persona was built on a foundation of lies and entitlement, and he was so convinced he would win that he didn't even try to soften his tone. He actually reiterated the gift claim in front of the mediator. That was his final mistake before the turning point. I looked at Ms. Davies. Her eyes confirmed it. The time was now. The air in the mediation room was thick with Alex's self-satisfied entitlement. He had just finished his monologue, painting himself as the victim of his confused and jealous mother, and the mediator was nodding neutrally, starting to look like she might recommend some sort of minimal settlement just to make me go away. Alex was practically preening. He thought he had won. But this was the moment we had been waiting for, the turning point. Miss Davies leaned forward, her demeanor shifting from calm observation to sharp, surgical focus. With all due respect to opposing counsel, we have patiently listened to Mr. Reed's interpretation of events, specifically his repeated assertion that the $80,000 was a gift, not a loan, and that my client is pursuing this action out of some misplaced spite or confusion. She paused, letting the silence hang. Alex folded his arms, rolling his eyes dismissively. Miss Davies then turned to the mediator. However, the foundation of this case rests entirely on the defendant's deliberate and fraudulent denial of the debt. We have evidence, direct evidence, that refutes every claim Mr. Reed has made, and establishes both the debt and the malicious nature of his refusal to repay it. Alex scoffed loudly. Evidence? What, a sticky note from 20 years ago? Come on, Mom. Miss Davies didn't even look at him. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small, professional digital audio player. Mr. Reed, you are on record claiming that my client, Isabella Reed, is mentally unstable and that she is trying to destroy your business. You claim this money was a gift given out of love. Is that still your position? Alex was supremely confident. Yes. Absolutely. My mother gave me a gift. She's just having trouble remembering things. Miss Davies smiled, a chillingly professional smile. Very well. With the mediator's permission, I would like to introduce Exhibit A, an unedited audio recording of a conversation between the plaintiff and the defendant, detailing the exact nature of this gift, and the consequences of Mrs. Reed's request for repayment. The mediator granted permission and Miss Davies hit play. The silence that followed was deafening. The recording was crystal clear. First, you could hear my measured voice asking for clarification on the debt. And then Alex's voice, unmistakable, dripping with contempt. Audio playback. Alex, recorded repayment? What are you talking about, Mom? Oh, that. Mom, seriously? That wasn't a loan. That was a gift. Paperwork. You're an accountant, Mom, you know how lawyers can twist anything. Besides, you're my mother. 80 grand is nothing to you. It's a gift from a wealthy parent to their hardworking son. The color drained from Alex's face immediately. His lawyer's jaw dropped. The recording continued, playing the absolute worst part, the explicit threat. Audio playback. Alex, recorded. In fact, if you push this, I'll just tell everyone you're mentally unstable and trying to ruin my thriving business out of jealousy. I'll make sure you regret even bringing it up. The recording ended. The room was utterly motionless. Alex finally sprang up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. He was trembling, not with sadness or regret, but with raw, panicked fury. That's illegal. That's inadmissible. That's edited. You can't record me. This is a setup, he shrieked, pointing an accusatory finger at me. His poor, out-of-his-depth lawyer tried weakly to intervene. Objection. We contest the veracity of this recording. Miss Davies calmly stepped forward, holding up a small document. The recording was obtained in a one-party consent state, which is perfectly legal. Furthermore, we have an expert affidavit attesting that the audio is unedited and authentic. The defendant's reaction, I believe, speaks for itself. The mediator, who had maintained professional neutrality throughout, now looked at Alex with an expression of profound disapproval. This wasn't just a legal matter anymore. It was a character issue. Alex's mask had been ripped off in the most spectacular fashion, revealing the manipulative monster underneath. The rising drama was intense. Alex was out of control. He started yelling at me right there in the mediation room, proving exactly how volatile and threatening he was. You witch. You backstabbing, conniving witch. You kept that hidden. You planned this. You're not my mother. You're nothing but a cruel old woman. He completely devolved, confirming everything the tape suggested. Miss Davies let him rage for a moment, then calmly interjected, I believe we can cease mediation now. Mr. Reed has just reiterated the aggressive and non-cooperative nature that necessitates litigation. We have a signed loan agreement, proof of the transfer, and the defendant's own voice admitting to the deliberate misclassification of the debt and threatening the plaintiff. The mediator quickly agreed, wrapping up the session in less than 5 minutes after the tape played. She looked at Alex with pity mixed with disgust. Mr. Reed, based on the evidence presented, this case will proceed to trial. I strongly advise you to immediately retain more competent counsel. Alex left the room in a blind fury, storming out and shouting about how I was going to pay for this. He didn't realize he had already paid the price of revealing his true self. That recording was the betrayal turned into a weapon. It was the moment I stopped being his mother and became his primary creditor and legal adversary. The path was now clear. No more negotiation, no more mercy. Only justice. The trial date was set, and the battle was officially moving to a public stage where Alex's reputation, the very thing he bragged about, was about to be obliterated. The days between the explosive mediation session and the eventual court date felt like a slow-motion descent into Alex's own personal hell, a hell entirely created by his arrogance. He hadn't just lost the moral argument in mediation. He had signed his own financial death warrant. The court date arrived and the atmosphere was tense. Alex, looking slightly less smug but still defiantly arrogant, had managed to scrape together a marginally better lawyer, though the damage was already done. Miss Davies, however, was in her element. She presented the case with the precision of a master surgeon. The initial loan agreement, the bank transfer records, the precedent of his previous smaller loans, all were laid out perfectly. But the cornerstone of our case, the thing that sealed his fate, was the audio recording which was officially entered into evidence. Miss Davies played it for the judge. Not the whole thing, just the damning excerpts. Alex calling the loan a gift, and the chilling threat of declaring me mentally unstable. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with decades of experience, listened without expression. When the recording finished, she looked directly at Alex. That look was enough to make anyone squirm. It wasn't just a look of legal scrutiny, it was a look of deep moral disappointment. Alex's new lawyer tried to salvage the situation, arguing the recording was taken out of context and that Alex had been under emotional duress. But Miss Davies was ready. She simply pointed to Alex's own repeated public denials of the debt and his behavior in the mediation room, which she legally summarized as demonstrating willful and malicious intent to defraud. The twist came swiftly and decisively. The judge didn't waste time. She didn't call for further testimony. She rendered an immediate oral judgment, essentially tearing down Alex's financial empire right there in the courtroom. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Isabella Reed, the judge declared, her voice ringing with authority. The evidence, specifically the signed agreement, the financial records, and the defendant's own recorded admission and subsequent threats, overwhelmingly establishes the existence of a valid $80,000 loan, and the defendant's malicious breach of that contract. This was the expected resolution part, the part where I got my $80,000 back. But Miss Davies, remembering Alex's boastful wealth and his outrageous threats, had pushed for something much, much harder. The judge continued, outlining the penalty that went far beyond mere repayment. Given the defendant Alexander Reed's documented pattern of fraudulent misrepresentation and threatening behavior toward the plaintiff, his own mother, the court finds that simply ordering repayment is insufficient. The court finds him liable for the principal amount of $80,000, plus accrued legal interest, plus all court and legal fees incurred by the plaintiff, amounting to an additional $12,500. Total owed, $92,500. Alex's face was pale, but he probably thought he could just write a check and get on with his life. That's when the judge delivered the crushing blow, the ultimate act of taking everything he loved. Furthermore, the judge stated, due to the nature of the defendant's willful concealment and threat of further damage to the plaintiff, the court has authorized a temporary injunction and a freeze on all assets tied to Alexander Reed's business and personal accounts, effective immediately, until the full amount of $92,500 is repaid in certified funds. The word freeze hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Alex's lawyer actually put his head in his hands. Alex looked like he'd been shot. The freezing of his assets meant he couldn't access the cash flow from his booming business. He couldn't pay his employees. He couldn't pay his suppliers. He couldn't even pay the rent on his fancy SUV or his expensive office space. The business, his source of pride and his entire identity, was instantly, legally paralyzed. He finally broke. Not the performative rage from the mediation, but a genuine, terrified panic. Your Honor, you can't. My business. I have payroll. I can't access anything, he stammered, his confident mask finally shattering. The judge cut him off sharply. The court is not responsible for your payroll, Mr. Reed. You had ample opportunity to honor your obligations. Repay the $92,500 and the injunction will be lifted. Until then, your accounts remain frozen. Case closed. Alex tried to appeal, he tried to argue, but the bailiffs were already moving to escort him out. He turned to me, his eyes full of a mixture of betrayal and pure hatred. You ruined me. You took everything, he hissed. I met his gaze, completely calm. No, Alex, I said softly, though I knew he was too far gone to hear it. You took everything from yourself when you decided my hard work was a gift and my love was a weakness. The true resolution unfolded over the next few weeks. Alex's business collapsed. Without access to his funds, he couldn't operate. His employees quit. His landlord evicted him from the expensive office space. His girlfriend, Tiffany, the one who loved the expensive trips and the fancy car, left him almost immediately when she realized his accounts were untouchable. He lost the SUV. He lost his reputation in the business community. I got my $92,500 back, wired directly from his frozen business accounts as soon as the judge processed the final paperwork. But the money honestly wasn't the biggest win. The biggest win was the realization that sometimes, the best revenge is simply letting entitled people experience the very real, very painful consequences of their own actions. I took everything he loved, his image, his money, and his security, not out of spite but because the court decreed it was necessary for justice. He thought he could use me like a bank and mock me. I proved to him that I was still the meticulous accountant who knew how to balance the books. And in the ledger of life, Alex found out that the balance due for arrogance and deceit is always far higher than the principal amount. It was a terrible, painful lesson for a mother to teach her son, but sometimes, the only way to teach responsibility is through total consequence. And now I have my retirement savings back, along with a quiet, hard-earned peace. If you enjoyed this story of justice and unexpected consequences, please do me a favor. Drop a comment below, hit that like button, and subscribe so you don't miss the next unbelievable tale.